Yeah, it's really interesting. I wanted to see what argument they were going to make here to this judge. They're arguing that all of this is in the public interest. And I will say the Justice Department has not gotten a lot right on the messaging about this effort. But here it appears that the Attorney General Pam Bondi and Todd Blanche, they're at least striking the right tone. Look, I don't know if this is going to work, but what they're writing here, they're saying, quote, public officials, lawmakers, pundits, and ordinary citizens remain deeply interested and concerned about the Epstein matter. They are noting the fact that in other places they have released portions of grand jury transcripts after concluding that the Epstein case qualifies as a matter of public concern. After all, Jeffrey Epstein, they say, is, quote, the most infamous pedophile in American history. The facts surrounding the Epstein case tell a tale of national disgrace. They argue the grand jury records are thus critical pieces of an important moment in our nation's history. They also argue that they understand there are privacy interests for victims and accusers, and they believe that a lot of the privacy concerns are diminished by the fact that Epstein is, of course, deceased, but they're willing to work with prosecutors to try to redact anything that could potentially impact victims. So the arguments here, they are well articulated. As you have said, though, this is just a tiny portion of the evidence that exists, and now the judge will likely want to allow those accusers, victims, their lawyers to weigh in on this possibility because grand jury material is by default confidential. And look, even if the judge decides that he will release some of this, there are still going to be questions about all the rest of the material that the Justice Department itself has the power to release and has not done so.
Right, and just to underline it again for folks, this is the grand jury testimony related to the prosecutions of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. The questions and the reason why people want more accountability, Jeffrey Epstein's dead, Ghislaine Maxwell's in prison, is because they're questions of all the other people who may have been involved. They will not necessarily be mentioned in this because the prosecutors were not going after them.
That's exactly right. Highly unlikely that any of those other individuals are mentioned here. But the Attorney General, I really think it's important to note that she said last week that they reviewed this case and they don't believe that they have evidence to go after any third parties. But clearly, the public is not satisfied by that.
Meanwhile, there remain unresolved mysteries surrounding Jeffrey Epstein. Joining us now is award-winning Miami Herald investigative reporter Julie K. Brown. She exposed many horrific details of the Epstein sex trafficking story previously not brought to light. In fact, it was her 2018 story that brought this all back into the fore. She's the author of a great book on the subject that I highly recommend. It's called Perversion of Justice, the Jeffrey Epstein story. Came out in 2021. Julie, thanks for joining us again. There's still so many documents about Epstein that can be released outside of what Trump has asked Bondi to ask the judge to release in the grand jury report in the investigation into Ghislaine Maxwell. There's Epstein's autopsy report, financial transactions, FBI investigation, interview transcripts, how the FBI and the Justice Department handled the case back in 2008, how they handled the case in 2019. Why do you think none of this has been made public, and do you think there's going to be more pressure on the president to release such information? Let me just ask you even a more narrow question. What do you, as an investigative reporter, if you could get one tranche of this information that has been held back, delivered right to you for your next scoop, what would you want?
I'd want his financial records, to be honest with you, because I think that's the smoking gun here. Epstein's finances and how he made his money, who he got money from. I honestly think that the way to go with this would be to follow the money and look at his finances. But to go back a little bit, just to this grand jury effort that he is mounting right now. I was able to speak to a couple of victims and lawyers that represent the victims, and they're very skeptical about what's happening here because they believe that there are certain words that are being used by the Justice Department and by the president, words like pertinent and credible, and that those to them are words that mean that they might not be getting everything, even with asking for the grand jury records, because they believe that those kinds of things are being used to siphon off records that maybe they don't consider are pertinent or credible. So they're very skeptical about all this. The other point I want to make about the grand jury records is as far as we know, and my sources in the case have said, is the Justice Department only focused on prosecuting first Epstein, and then when he died, then Maxwell. It was a very narrow investigation. They didn't go into anything beyond that. They didn't go into any other aspect of Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking ring. So most of the information that I know about is probably information that's already out there that we know that has been revealed during trial.
Jeffrey Epstein's former attorney, David Schoen, who also represented President Trump during his second impeachment trial, said this earlier today on CNN. Take a listen.
There is no Epstein client list, that I can tell you, that lists names of people who he purportedly took to an island with young girls or any place else with young women. I can assure you he would have used that to his advantage if there were. And I can assure you the accusers who were involved in those situations, if they were involved with fill in the blank, some famous person, they would have sued by now. Their lawyers are very aggressive and have made millions off of those lawsuits.
What's your response?
Oh, gosh. They did sue. They sued a lot of powerful men. We just don't know about it, because when you sue somebody that powerful, they settle. And so there were plenty of lawsuits that the victims filed against these powerful men. That's part of what their lawyers did, and it's been all settled all quietly, and we just don't know about it. So that's just simply not true.
Schoen says he met with Epstein 9 days before Epstein was found dead in his cell in 2019, and they discussed several topics, including Trump. Take a listen.
I specifically asked him about Donald Trump, and he was adamant in making clear that he had no bad information about Trump. Remember, Trump had thrown him out of his club years earlier. He wasn't happy about the idea of Trump being falsely accused, because Trump was one of the names being thrown around then.
Now, there's still a lot unknown about Trump and Epstein's relationship, although nothing illegal has credibly been put forward. But according to the Wall Street Journal's news story, there's this letter bearing Trump's name with a crude sketch of a naked woman that was part of this birthday book for Epstein in 2003. Again, that's 2 years before Epstein was ever accused of anything untoward with underage girls. The Wall Street Journal says the letter concludes with the line, quote, "Happy birthday, and may every day be another wonderful secret." Again, President Trump vehemently denies this. He writing on Truth Social, quote, "These are not my words, not the way I talk. Also, I don't draw pictures." He's also filing this libel suit against the Wall Street Journal and News Corp and Rupert Murdoch. On the drawings, just as a side note, here's a sketch Trump drew in 2005 of the New York.
Something I learned very early on in my politics is either A, don't put yourself in the story in the first place, right? So if a reporter calls and wants to comment on something, no comment. Or B, if you're already in the story, shut up. Right? Stop talking about it. Stop egging it on. You have, the NBC News talking about the Bondi frustration, noting some White House officials and outside Trump allies remain frustrated with Attorney General Bondi's handling of the Jeffrey Epstein saga of the past 2 weeks, seeing the issue as a problem largely of the DOJ's creation, which the AG should be doing more to solve. But she can't, because the president keeps feeding the beast. So it makes it harder for her to dial down the noise. It's not just to Brandy's point of, oh, here are the documents, because there's a lot of ripple effect to that. How do you see this part of it playing out, given that Trump now has upped the ante, leveled up with a lawsuit against the Wall Street Journal, continues to talk about this, and yet everyone's looking at Pam Bondi to shut it down by releasing the documents?
You know, if we take the Steele rule of either no comment or shut the heck up, that's not Donald Trump. It never is. He seems to be doing everything possible to suggest there's some wrongdoing that may involve him, may involve others. It looks like a cover-up. He's telling people there's nothing there, after all his people and himself for years have pointed to the Epstein files as the Rosetta Stone of proving this grand conspiracy theory of Satanists and pedophiles and sex traffickers really being in control of the government, the QAnon conspiracy theory and the Pizzagate theory that Brandy just referenced. So it's kind of weird to watch him keep coming back to this and making it look like he's guilty of something. And once you get and I think Brandy gets into this in her piece. Once you get into this issue of we're going to release things, well then, if you don't release everything, you're going to be accused of running a cover-up, right? This is grand jury testimony. Even now, when they say they're going to release the grand jury testimony, they're saying it will only be credible stuff that we release. There probably will be redactions. And the grand jury testimony is just a small slice of all the investigative records that the Justice Department and the FBI and Florida police gathered over the course of 2 investigations of Donald Trump. So if you just put out the grand jury testimony with part of it redacted, the MAGA conspiracy nutters are still going to say, you're not giving us everything. So they're really in a situation where there's no way out, especially if Trump keeps talking about it.
Anthony Coley, I do think it's important to remind people, because the president yesterday and again today alluded to that this has been conjured up by the Democrats and people who do not support him. This was the crimes of Jeffrey Epstein were real. So real that it was the first Trump administration Justice Department that charged and arrested Jeffrey Epstein in 2019, in July of 2019. Now, he later died by suicide in August of 2019, but Ghislaine Maxwell is literally sitting in jail as we speak, awaiting trial for these very real crimes. There are victims associated with this story. There is trauma that is being dredged back up that, frankly, Brandy alluded to in her opening comments as we talk about this. How do you've worked in the Justice Department before, but you've also worked for a number of different politicians. The handling of this story is what we call an unforced error.
Folks, remember what we said, right? Donald was going to try and get ahead of the story. In politics, like to put my PhD cap on, in politics, there's something called, passive revolution, where the elites in society will give the masses a tiny crumb of something so they don't ask for the whole pie. It's like the rich and wealthy and well-connected started giving workers just a little bit here and there when they started fearing that the workers would unite and take everything from the billionaire class, right? And so Trump is doing that in a way. He's saying, look, I surrender, I give up. Here's the files. We're going to release them. The DOJ is going through with this. Some people are trying to frame it as the DOJ is disagreeing with Trump. I really don't think that's the case, because if Trump really disagreed with this move, he would have just removed everybody responsible for it. And if that was illegal, he would just do it anyway, because that's what he does, right? So I think it's very clearly, as we said earlier, him saying, oh, I'm all for transparency. You got me. I'm gonna, be transparent. But remember, the wording he's used is that, oh, it's only pertinent stuff and it's only relevant to this and we got to factor in other things. And it's going to be used as an excuse to selectively release things. So you're probably going to see mostly benign, boring stuff, very factual things we already knew in reporting. And you might see tidbits to throw other people under the bus that aren't Trump and Republicans. But keep in mind that we can't trust Trump to, in good faith, release everything. And that's important to remember.